On August 19, 2018, at 9:24 a.m., Joshua Burgess walked into the Union County Sheriff's Office and calmly confessed. No emotion, no panic, just a chilling statement that would change everything. He led them to a scene that no one was prepared for: a father, a daughter, a betrayal so profound it defies reason. What drives a man to destroy the very life he helped create? What makes a parent cross the line from protector to predator? This is not just another crime story. This is a story about trust broken in the most unimaginable way by the one person who should have kept her safe. Who is this man? What was his motive? And how could something so evil come from someone who seemed so normal? You won't understand it until you see it for yourself. Joshua Lee Burgess was born in 1984 in Monroe, North Carolina, a small town where the promise of a better life often seemed just out of reach. As a child, Joshua experienced the harshness of a neighborhood defined by poverty, crime, and instability. His family, like many others, struggled to make ends meet, and the path to success seemed a distant dream. But Joshua managed to stay out of trouble for the most part. He kept his head down and his heart heavy, always searching for something more but never quite finding it. In high school, he met Akeisha Pope, and their young love was like something out of a movie, a brief, passionate romance that seemed to promise a future full of possibilities. But life had other plans. By the time they were both 16, Akeisha was pregnant, and their carefree days were replaced with the harsh reality of impending parenthood. Zaria Jocelyn Burgess was born on December 3, 2003, in Monroe, North Carolina. From the start, she was full of life. Her presence was magnetic, a light in every room she entered. Her smile, infectious and wide, had a way of making people forget their problems, even if just for a moment. As a little girl, Zaria's warmth drew people in, and by the time she reached high school, her charm had only grown stronger. A member of the marching band and an avid dancer, she poured her heart into everything she did. Whether on the field, the stage, or just walking through the halls of Monroe High, Zaria carried an energy that made her unforgettable. Her peers admired her, not just for her talents, but for the way she made everyone around her feel seen, heard, and loved. But as much as she shone in public, something darker was taking shape behind closed doors. Her relationship with her mother, Akeisha, was the foundation of her life, steady and unshakable. Akeisha worked tirelessly to give Zaria a life filled with love and stability, even if that meant sacrificing her own personal time and dreams. Akeisha's dedication to Zaria never wavered. She was her daughter's greatest supporter, the one person Zaria could always count on. But as Zaria grew older, the safe world she'd always known began to fracture in ways that would break her heart. The father she had once looked up to, the man who posted proud pictures of their time together on Facebook, slowly turned into someone else, a man Zaria could no longer trust. Joshua Burgess had always been her hero, the father who made her laugh, who took her on trips, and who beamed with pride at every milestone she achieved. To the outside world, he was the epitome of a loving, doting father. But to Zaria, the man in the photos was increasingly hard to recognize. As the years passed, Joshua's temper became harder to ignore. Zaria, though she tried to keep up appearances, began to sense something was wrong. She confided in her friends that, sometimes, her father's anger seemed to explode out of nowhere. He would lash out at her, say hurtful things, and, on occasion, threaten to leave her on the side of the road during their long truck trips together. This wasn't the same man who used to hold her hand and take her to fairs. This was someone else, a stranger, lurking in the place of the father she thought she knew. Despite her growing discomfort, Zaria felt trapped. Her mother, busy with her commitments to church and work, still required her to go on weekends to see her father. Zaria, now a teenager, didn't want to hurt her mother, and she didn't want to disappoint her. But each visit felt like a strain on her spirit. Each weekend, she tried to push the discomfort aside, but it gnawed at her. She had loved her father, once, but now she felt like a prisoner in a home that should have been a place of safety. Zaria began to avoid him more. She came up with excuses not to go. But she knew deep down that her reluctance wasn't just typical teenage rebellion. It was fear. A quiet, creeping fear that built up with each passing visit. She didn't feel safe with him anymore. She could no longer ignore the pattern of threats, the unpredictable outbursts, the possessiveness. The father who had once been so proud of her now made her feel like a burden, an object of control rather than the daughter he should have cherished. Her discomfort deepened when she confided in her friends. They listened, offering support, but Zaria still struggled to fully comprehend what was happening to her. She couldn't explain it, but the unease she felt around her father grew stronger with each encounter. His public displays of affection on Facebook seemed to mock her growing discomfort. She saw the posts, Joshua proudly posing with her at fairs, celebrating their perfect weekends together. But each picture made her feel more and more isolated. To the world, he was the perfect father. But to her, he was becoming a stranger. Zaria didn't know how to voice the confusion in her heart. She loved her father, but she was scared of him. She didn't know how to reconcile the man who smiled in photos with the one who left her trembling after their arguments. She didn't know how to express that the man she had always trusted was now someone she feared. What happens when a father, the one meant to protect you, turns into the source of your nightmares? What would you do? Share your opinions in the comments below. The morning of August 18, 2018, started like any other. But for Zaria Burgess, 15 years old and on the cusp of entering her sophomore year of high school, something felt different. The air was thick with an unease she couldn't explain, and the excitement she should have felt about the coming school year was clouded by the dread building in the pit of her stomach. She had to spend the weekend with her father, Joshua, a routine she had grown increasingly reluctant to follow. The once tight bond she had with him had frayed over time, replaced by an uncomfortable distance that no one seemed to notice, least of all Joshua. Zaria had tried to make other plans. She texted her best friend, hoping to spend the night there instead. But the response came back quickly. Her friend's family had plans of their own. Zaria's heart sank. She tried again, asking her mother, Akeisha, if she could stay home. But Akeisha was busy with the church dance team and couldn't pick her up. So, with no other option, Zaria reluctantly packed her bag. The feeling in her chest tightened as she shoved her clothes into the bag, each item feeling heavier than the last. She wasn't sure why she was so uneasy, why every part of her body screamed that she shouldn't go. But she did. There was no escape. No one could fix the quiet storm inside her. So, she left for her father's house, knowing that once again she would have to pretend everything was fine, even though nothing felt right. As she arrived at Joshua's house, everything seemed normal. Joshua greeted her with the same smile he always wore when he was posing for photos. Friendly, warm, the father everyone saw on Facebook. He was the man who posted pictures of their trips, their moments of laughter. The man who spoke proudly of his daughter, sharing stories of their perfect weekends. To the outside world, he was a model father, one that Zaria had once looked up to. But now, with every step she took toward him, she felt something tugging at her. The unease grew with each passing moment, crawling under her skin, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. She did her best to push it aside, to act normal, but there was no denying the discomfort that grew within her. Joshua talked to her about their weekend plans, breakfast in the morning, maybe a trip to the fair. She forced a smile, nodding, pretending that she was okay. But every word felt empty, like they were trapped in a world that no longer made sense. She couldn't stop the growing anxiety, the subtle but unshakable feeling that something was terribly wrong. What Zaria didn't know was that Joshua had already made plans of his own. Plans that weren't about father-daughter bonding or fun outings. His motives were darker, twisted in a way that Zaria couldn't possibly comprehend. He wasn't preparing for a weekend with his daughter. He was preparing to claim control over her in a way that no one should ever have to fear from their own parents. Joshua's obsession with Zaria had been festering for months. The man who appeared to care so much about her, who so proudly displayed his love for her to the world, was now obsessed with her in a way that went beyond fatherly love. He didn't just want to spend time with her, he wanted to possess her. No one could have her. Not Akisha. Not anyone. Zaria was his. And the thoughts he kept buried deep inside were beginning to surface, manifesting in ways that were impossible to ignore. Zaria didn't know this. She couldn't have known. She tried to ignore the nagging feeling, telling herself it was just nerves. But deep inside, her gut was telling her something far worse. As they spent the day together, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Joshua seemed normal, but there were subtle hints. Small, almost imperceptible moments where his eyes lingered too long, where his smile faltered just a little too much. Zaria didn't know how to explain it, but she knew it was different. Her father had changed. He wasn't the man he used to be. That night, Zaria lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The world outside her window was silent, but inside, her thoughts screamed. The weekend was just beginning, but something in her bones told her that it was going to be the worst one yet. Have you ever had that gut feeling, like something was wrong, but you couldn't explain why? Tell us in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from. On the morning of August 19, 2018, the Union County Sheriff's Office saw a man walk through its doors who seemed completely at ease, despite the horror he was about to unfold. Joshua Burgess, the man who should have been a loving father, the man who had shared countless photos with his daughter Zaria, stood before law enforcement with no sign of fear. His eyes were cold, empty, devoid of any emotion. He spoke plainly, without hesitation. "I just killed someone." The officer behind the desk looked up, confused and unsure if she had heard him correctly. The words were so casual, so matter-of-fact, that they seemed surreal. Joshua, undisturbed by the weight of his confession, continued without remorse. "You won't find me in there," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "I just killed someone." The officer paused, taking in his words before quickly calling for backup. Something in Joshua's tone told her this was not a routine confession. He was speaking of his own daughter, Zaria, and his lack of emotion told her everything she needed to know about the depravity of his actions. Joshua led them to the scene of the crime. As deputies arrived at his house, they found it eerily quiet, nothing out of place on the surface. But once they stepped inside, the reality of what had taken place hit them like a freight train. In the living room, Zaria's body lay in a twisted, grotesque display. She was bound, her limbs handcuffed, her body nude, posed as if to send a chilling message to anyone who might walk through that door. The brutality of it was almost too much to take in. The image of a father, once proud of his daughter, once displaying her in joyful photos, now reduced to this unspeakable horror, was more than anyone could have prepared for. Her body told a story of unimaginable cruelty. Zaria had endured more than just physical violence. She had been subjected to over 24 hours of torment, sexual and psychological abuse that left her bruised, broken, and helpless. The investigators were struck by the viciousness of the assault. It wasn't just the deep knife wound to her throat, which had taken her life, but the sheer barbarity of the actions leading up to it. The struggle had been fierce. Zaria had fought for her life, and yet in the end, it had been futile. What no one could comprehend, though, was the coldness of Joshua's confession. As he described the events to the officers, there was no regret, no guilt, just a clinical recounting of his twisted plans. He told them that everything had been calculated, every detail meticulously planned. His obsession with Zaria, his need to control her, had led him to this dark place, where the father-daughter relationship had mutated into something horrific. Joshua revealed that he had taken her to breakfast on Saturday morning, as if it were any other weekend, but beneath the surface, something much darker was brewing. He admitted to the officers that the weekend had been his plan all along, to have Zaria to himself, to ensure that no one else could take her from him. He spoke of his twisted idea of ownership, describing how Zaria, as she grew older, became something he felt entitled to in a way no one should ever feel about another person. His love for her, in his mind, had turned into a possessiveness that twisted his view of their relationship. And then he said the words that would echo in the minds of everyone who heard them. "That weekend was the best 48 hours of my life." It was a chilling statement, one that shook the officers to their core. A father, a man, a monster. Joshua's confession was delivered without a flicker of emotion, as though he was recalling a pleasant weekend getaway instead of the murder of his own daughter. It was this complete absence of remorse, this chilling detachment, that painted the full portrait of his twisted mindset. To him, Zaria was no longer a daughter. She was a possession. He had planned every step of the crime, from breakfast to the brutal finale. And when Zaria fought back, when she nearly escaped, his cowardice showed. He chased her down, caught her, and ended her life with a final, fatal blow. Joshua's words would haunt the investigators long after the case was closed. There was no explanation for his actions, no hint of regret. He confessed to the crime with the same coldness as someone reciting a story, offering no explanation for why. Was it love? Possession? Control? There were no clear answers, only the tragic realization that this man, who once seemed so devoted to his daughter, had become her greatest threat. When law enforcement began to unravel the horror of Zaria Burgess's death, they could scarcely believe the brutality of what had happened under their noses. The first shock came not from the crime scene, though it was horrific in its own right, but from the confession Joshua Burgess had given. His lack of remorse, his chilling calmness, made it clear that he viewed his actions through a lens that no one could fully comprehend. But as investigators began to piece together the details of his confession, the true depth of his monstrosity began to emerge. Joshua had told them, step by step, how he had planned the weekend, detailing every moment leading up to Zaria's murder. His confession laid bare the sickening truth. He had not acted in a moment of rage. This had been carefully orchestrated. He spoke of the quiet satisfaction he had felt during the best 48 hours of his life, a statement that, in its sheer coldness, made it clear that for Joshua, this crime was the culmination of something dark and twisted that had been building for months. His own words painted the picture of a man consumed by obsession, his daughter no longer the person he once loved, but something to be controlled, something he could not and would not let go. As investigators continued to search through Joshua's home and his online history, the depth of his obsession became clearer. They uncovered images and posts on his social media accounts, a stark contrast between the smiling, proud father he presented to the world and the disturbing, darker side of his personality. The detectives discovered that Joshua had been increasingly isolating Zaria from others, manipulating her into believing that she owed him something, that she was his, and his alone. The photos of their perfect weekends now appeared as part of a larger pattern of control and manipulation, a facade designed to mask the growing danger beneath. Forensic evidence gathered at the scene further implicated Joshua in the crime. They found traces of Zaria's blood in several areas of the house, signs of the struggle she had endured before her death. The handcuffs used to bind her were examined for prints, and items from Joshua's home, such as the knives, were seized for further analysis. It was clear that everything about this crime had been deliberate, and no one could deny the brutal reality of what had taken place. But the most devastating piece of evidence came from the autopsy report. Zaria's body was examined in a way that no one should ever have to experience, but it was necessary to reveal the full extent of her suffering. The coroner's report detailed the horrific abuse Zaria had endured in her final hours. Zaria's body showed extensive bruising, signs of a violent struggle, and wounds consistent with prolonged psychological and physical torture. But the most disturbing revelation was that Zaria had been suffocated before the fatal knife wound was inflicted. The evidence indicated that she had been forced into unconsciousness at some point during the attack, only to regain some level of awareness before the final blow was struck. The depth of her pain and fear in her final moments was difficult to fathom, and the forensic evidence painted an even darker picture than anyone had initially imagined. Zaria had fought for her life, she had tried to escape, but her father, her protector, had turned into her tormentor. The pain she suffered in those final hours was unimaginable. And yet, her bravery in fighting for her life, even in the face of certain death, spoke volumes about the kind of person she was. As the investigation unfolded, the emotional impact of Zaria's death was felt far beyond the confines of the family. In Monroe, North Carolina, where Zaria had lived, the entire community was shaken by the news. Zaria had been the kind of girl who made an impact on everyone she met. She was known for her laughter, her kindness, and her ability to make people feel like they mattered. Her friends, classmates, and teachers struggled to comprehend how the girl who had been so full of life could now be gone, taken by the one person who should have protected her. Family and friends who had known Zaria her entire life were left in shock, their grief compounded by the unfathomable betrayal. They spoke of her as a bright, talented, and joyful young woman, a girl who had her whole life ahead of her, someone who was about to start her sophomore year of high school, and who had so much promise. They remembered her laughter, her energy, the way she always tried to make everyone around her happy. But what haunted them the most was the realization that the man they had known as a father, a son, a friend, was capable of the very act of violence they never would have imagined. How could the man who had posted smiling pictures with his daughter be the same one who committed such a heinous crime? How had the community failed to see the signs, the cracks beneath the surface? Many people who had known Joshua were quick to say they never saw this coming. And yet, as more details emerged, it became clear that this had been a tragedy waiting to happen. There were many who still couldn't believe it, who couldn't fathom how someone they knew, someone they trusted, could turn into a monster. Joshua's friends and family, who had once known him as a proud father, were left to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the reality of the monster he had become. For them, the investigation was not just a painful journey through the facts of the crime, but a deep, emotional struggle to come to terms with a person they had once trusted, someone who had destroyed the life of his own child. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. Joshua Burgess sat in the defendant's chair, his posture straight, his face unreadable. The once proud father who had posted photos of his daughter Zaria in parks and fairs, smiling together in family pictures, was now facing the cold reality of what he had done. He had killed his daughter, the girl he had sworn to protect. The charges were clear: first-degree murder, statutory rape, and a laundry list of other crimes that painted a picture of unimaginable cruelty. The prosecution began with the details, carefully unraveling the gruesome reality of Zaria's last hours. They laid out Joshua's actions with chilling clarity: his confession, the forensic evidence, the brutality of the murder, all laid bare for the jury to digest. Zaria had been tortured, psychologically and physically, for more than 24 hours before the final fatal blow. Her screams, her fear, her desperate attempts to fight back, these details filled the room, each one a reminder of what Joshua had stolen from her. The prosecutor described the suffocation, the knife wound that ended her life, and the cold way in which Joshua had arranged her body afterward, like a macabre display. But it was not just the crime that horrified the jury. It was Joshua's demeanor. As the details were presented, his face remained neutral. There was no shock, no remorse, no sign that he understood the magnitude of the suffering he had caused. His casual admission that the weekend with Zaria had been the best 48 hours of my life echoed in the room, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. How could a father say such words about his own daughter's murder? How could someone feel no regret for such a heinous act? The jury, consisting of people who had likely never encountered a case so full of darkness, sat frozen in disbelief. Each new detail seemed to hit harder than the last. Joshua's calmness was in stark contrast to the suffering described in the autopsy report. His lack of emotion as the prosecution described the brutal reality of his crime sent shockwaves through the room. Was this truly the same man who had once smiled for the cameras, standing proudly beside his daughter? Was this the man who had been the face of a loving father to his community? As the trial progressed, Zaria's family members took the stand, their grief raw and open for all to see. Akeisha, Zaria's mother, spoke first. Her voice trembled, but she held herself together long enough to speak about the girl she had raised with such love and devotion. Zarya had been more than just her daughter. She had been her best friend, the light of her life. Akisha spoke about the hopes she had for Zarya's future, the dream she had of seeing her daughter graduate, find her place in the world, and grow into a strong young woman. Instead, those dreams were shattered by a man she had once trusted, Zarya's father. Akisha's testimony was a powerful reminder of the loss that was felt by Zarya's family. She was not just a victim, she was a vibrant, talented young woman who had been taken too soon. Zarya's extended family also spoke of her in glowing terms, remembering her with love and admiration. They spoke about her infectious laugh, her ability to make everyone feel like they mattered, and the future she had lost. They could hardly believe that the man they had once considered a friend, a member of their community, was now responsible for destroying the life of a young girl they all loved. The jury listened to the testimony with solemn faces, each person processing the grief, the horror, and the disbelief in their own way. Zarya's family members were visibly broken, but they spoke with a clarity that showed how deeply they had been impacted by the loss of their beloved daughter and sister. They had no answers, no way of making sense of the unfathomable betrayal that had taken place. Then came the verdict. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom, their faces tight with emotion. They had heard the evidence, listened to the testimony, and seen the lack of remorse in Joshua's eyes. It didn't take long for them to come to a unanimous decision. Joshua Burgess was guilty. The case, the evidence, the chilling confession, it all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. The court moved on to sentencing. The weight of the moment was felt by everyone in the room. How do you punish a father for the murder of his own daughter? There were no words that could ever make the family feel whole again, no sentence that could undo the pain they felt. But the law had to act. Joshua sat silently, his face a mask of indifference. The courtroom had seen the worst of him, his confession, his lack of remorse, his twisted justification for his actions. And now, the law would have the final word. How would you reconcile the image of a loving father with the brutal reality of his actions? Let us know in the comment what you would do. Joshua Burgess sat silently as the judge pronounced his sentence. The words felt like a distant echo to those who had been listening to the proceedings. The sentence was just, but it would never undo the damage that had been done. Guilty. Death sentence. The law had done its job, but Zarya was still gone, and no punishment would ever bring her back. The courtroom was heavy with emotion, but there was no solace in the verdict. For Zarya's family, the pain would never be erased. Her mother, Akisha, had lost a piece of her soul that day, a mother's love, the hopes and dreams for her daughter's future, and the promise of everything Zarya could have been. The sentencing didn't bring closure. It only confirmed the irreversibility of the loss. The public's reaction was divided. Some found solace in the decision, believing that Joshua deserved the death penalty for the heinous acts he had committed. Others felt that death was too kind for a man who had betrayed the very child he had once raised. How could a father, someone who had spent years posing for family photos and proudly sharing moments with his daughter, turn into a monster capable of such cruelty? The question of his fate stirred up debates about justice, the death penalty, and what punishment was truly fitting for a crime this horrific. But despite the varying opinions on Joshua's sentencing, there was one truth that everyone had to face. No punishment could bring Zarya back. No sentence, no matter how severe, could undo the horrors she had faced. Zarya's future had been stolen. Her life was cut short by the very man who was supposed to protect her. In the aftermath of her death, Zarya's family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. Akisha, in her grief, found herself driven to action. She knew that the pain of losing Zarya would never go away, but she could honor her daughter's memory by making sure no other child suffered the same fate. Akisha became an advocate for child safety, speaking out about the warning signs of abuse, the importance of family dynamics in a child's well-being, and the need to protect vulnerable children from harm. Zarya's name, though forever tied to tragedy, became a symbol of hope for other children who were at risk, and a rallying cry for change. The ripples of Zaria's death spread far beyond her family. Teachers, classmates, and friends who had once shared her laughter, seen her smile, and been touched by her kindness, were left heartbroken. Zaria was not just a statistic. She was a young woman with dreams, a future that was now forever unrealized. Her peers spoke out about the loss of someone who had brought light into their lives, someone who had made everyone around her feel special. Through their pain, Zaria's family ensured that her death was not in vain. Scholarships were set up in her name, and the community came together to raise awareness about the dangers children face from those they trust most. Zaria's memory became a tool for change, a reminder that no matter how much we may want to believe in the goodness of the people we trust, there are times when darkness hides behind the most familiar faces. And yet, for Zaria's family, there was always that question. How had Joshua, the father who once proudly showed off pictures of his daughter, become a man capable of such unspeakable evil? How could someone who had loved and protected her in the public eye become the very person who destroyed her in the most brutal way? Was it an obsession? Was it a twisted need for control? Or was it something far deeper, a psychological unraveling that no one saw coming? The trial had been an attempt to understand the mind of a killer, but there were no easy answers. Joshua's coldness, his lack of remorse, and his chilling confession painted a picture of a man who had crossed a line no one could have imagined. His public persona had been a mask, hiding the twisted reality beneath. His obsession with Zaria had not been about love. It had been about possession, about control. And in the end, he took everything from her, including her life. As the case closed, the question remained: how does someone like Joshua Burgess, a man who once seemed like a loving father, become capable of such a horrific crime? The answer was not simple. The depths of human darkness are often hidden from view, buried beneath layers of normalcy. And in the case of Joshua Burgess, that darkness had festered for years, unnoticed until it was too late. Zaria's story remains a warning, a reminder of the dangers lurking in the most unexpected places. It challenges us to think about trust, family, and the psychological forces that drive people to do the unthinkable. Zaria may no longer be with us, but her legacy, her life, her story, continues to inspire change and raise awareness about the dangers that children face. And for that, her memory will never fade. Zaria's story raises the question: how do we recognize the signs before it's too late? How do we protect the ones we love when they are at the mercy of those meant to protect them? Let us know in the comments. The story of Zaria Burgess lingers, unanswered questions hanging in the air. How could a father, the person entrusted with protecting and loving his daughter, turn into the monster who took her life? What signs did the world miss before it was too late? Was there anything that could have been done differently? These are the questions that haunt us all. They challenge our perceptions of family, trust, and the darkness that can lie hidden in the most familiar places. The case of Zaria Burgess isn't just a tragic story. It's a warning, a reminder that the dangers to our children often come from the people they trust most, and it calls us to act, to look closer, to listen more intently, and to speak out when we see signs of something amiss. Zaria's life was stolen from her, but her story has sparked a conversation that cannot be ignored. Her tragic end has raised awareness about child safety, the importance of recognizing the warning signs of abuse, and the devastating impact of family dynamics gone wrong. But there is more work to be done. Zaria's legacy lives on, not just in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the lessons we must learn from her death. How can we, as a society, prevent such tragedies from happening again? How can we ensure that every child like Zaria is given the love, safety, and protection they deserve? It starts with us, by raising our voices, supporting our children, and demanding better for the most vulnerable in our communities. What can we learn from Zaria's story, and how can we make sure no other child falls victim to such horrors? How can we, as individuals and as a society, take action to protect children from the dangers they face, both known and unseen? We want to hear your thoughts and ideas. Together, we can help prevent another tragedy like this one. If this story has touched you, if you feel compelled to take action, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth investigations. Your support helps us continue raising awareness about important issues like child safety and justice. Let's keep this conversation going. Zaria's story deserves to be heard, and her legacy deserves to inspire change.